Welcome! In this video, we're going to discuss the basics of classical conditioning. By the end of the video, you should be able to explain how classical conditioning occurs, as well as identify an unconditioned stimulus, an unconditioned response, a conditioned stimulus, and conditioned response in a variety of examples. Classical conditioning is a type of associative learning. Associative learning involves making associations between stimuli or stimuli and events in the environment. And there's different types of associative learning. We're going to discuss classical conditioning in this video. We'll discuss operant conditioning in another video, and observational learning in a third video. But they're all types of associative learning where we're making connections between stimuli or stimuli and events in the environment. Here's the definition of classical conditioning: the process by which a previously neutral stimulus acquires a capacity to elicit a response through association with a stimulus that already elicits a similar response. Now that's a lot of words, and it may not mean a whole lot to you right now, but we'll come back to it after we talk about the basics of classical conditioning and how classical conditioning was identified as a type of learning. The principles of classical conditioning were actually stumbled upon by accident. And this is how a lot of great scientific discoveries are actually made. You have excellent scientists with excellent observational skills that stumble upon something that was unexpected. In this case, we had Ivan Pavlov, who was a Russian physiologist, and he was studying dog salivation. So he was interested in digestion, and to do that, he was looking at salivary excretions. He would bring dogs into a room and place some sort of food in the dog's mouth to cause them to salivate. Well, one of the students observed that the dogs actually were salivating before the food was being given to them. Simply the sight of the food bowl or the person who delivered the food was sometimes enough to make the dog salivate. Pavlov realized that his student had come across something truly amazing and came to believe that this was the basis of learning for all animals and humans. So from these experiments, he coined the terms we'll talk about in the coming slides that will better help us understand classical conditioning. This type of learning is central to behaviorism because rather than trying to figure out what was going on in the dog's mind or what they were thinking when this response happened, he was able to stick to things that could be observed. And what was happening in the environment, what he could observe in the environment that was causing this conditioned response. So here's just a little meme, a little sketch of Pavlov's setup for his experiment where he was collecting the salivary excretions, and it just says, wait, watch what I can make Pavlov do. As soon as I drool, he'll smile and write in his little book. So now we're going to talk about the components of this salivary reflex or response. So the unconditioned stimulus, or UCS, elicits a response in the absence of learning. So this is something in the environment that elicits a natural reflexive response. The unconditioned response, the UCR, is a reflexive response to a stimulus in the absence of learning. So this is a stimulus-response pair that's instinctive, innate. No learning has to have occurred. In our example here, the dog food, the UCS, naturally causes salivation. And sometimes you'll see the abbreviation UCS or US, and sometimes you'll see UCS or UR. They're the same thing. So this is the unconditioned stimulus is the dog food, and the unconditioned response is the salivation. The salivation is a behavior naturally, reflexively occurring in response to the food, which is a stimulus. So learning occurs when a neutral stimulus is unregularly paired with the unconditioned stimulus. So the neutral stimulus needs to be something that didn't already elicit this behavioral response. So in our case, the neutral stimulus we're talking about is the food bowl. That was paired with the unconditioned stimulus, the dog food, which naturally elicited the salivation. Now, after several pairings of the bowl with the dog food and the salivation occurring, over time, now the bowl comes to naturally elicit salivation on its own. So the conditioned stimulus is an initially neutral stimulus that comes to elicit a conditioned response after being paired with an unconditioned stimulus. So in our case, the dog food bowl was a neutral stimulus. It came to elicit the conditioned response, salivation, because the bowl was paired with the dog food and salivation resulted. The conditioned response is a response or a behavior that's elicited by the conditioned stimulus. The conditioned response occurs after the conditioned stimulus has been associated with the unconditioned stimulus. So you have a pairing of the neutral stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus. And so there's an association that has been made. That's why it's called associative learning. The conditioned response is going to be very similar to the unconditioned response. If not identical, it just is occurring in response to a different stimulus. This is a learned response. Learning must occur for this behavioral response to occur. So this stimulus-response pair is learned. Again, in our case, the bowl was initially a neutral stimulus. It was paired with that dog food. After several pairings, now the dog food bowl comes to elicit the salivation. So the food bowl is our conditioned stimulus and salivation is our conditioned response. So let's take a look at our definition again. The process by which a previously neutral stimulus acquires a capacity to elicit a response through association with a stimulus that already elicits a similar response. Let's break that down. We have the process by which a previously neutral stimulus, our bowl, acquires a capacity to elicit a response, salivation, through the association with a stimulus, our food, that already elicited a similar response, the salivation. So those are the basics of classical conditioning. In our next video, we'll build upon that and talk about the principles of classical conditioning.